One benefit of being able to listen to audio is that you can still follow along with this message even while carrying on with whatever else you might be doing. God, please give me a soft and humble heart as I listen. Please open my eyes and my ears and change my spirit so I may know you and worship you in spirit and in truth. Before we begin, direct and circumstantial evidence versus the scientific method. In the last segment of Before We Begin, we talked a little about science being a search for truth. We also discovered, unfortunately, that due to the predisposition of naturalism, our modern day idea of science is not automatically truly scientific. This regrettably impacts the way we go about explaining phenomena and determining what is and what is not true of the universe around us. However, the means of discovery itself is neutral, and it is known as the scientific method. The scientific method is a body of techniques for investigating phenomena, acquiring new knowledge, or correcting previous knowledge. It's deemed scientific because the method is commonly based on empirical or measurable evidences which can be subjected to specific principles of reasoning. When it comes to seeking God and pursuing the truth about Him, which sets a person free and grants eternal life, the scientific method has some shortfalls. God, who is infinite in all ways, is hardly quantifiable. You cannot directly gather Him up and measure or weigh Him, nor can you sit and observe or qualify Him. You can't even use instruments to detect or record Him. But most definitely, you cannot force Him to submit to any manner of testing in order to prove that He is there and that He is listening. Not when He's already said, "You shall not put the Lord your God to the test." The scientific method and the scientific proof it delivers are best suited for the material realm. They have to do with establishing facts by observing repeatable events while making measurements, empirically verifying hypotheses, and recording data in a controlled environment. Perhaps this is why the majority in the scientific community have difficulty believing in God. Not due to the philosophy of naturalism alone, but also because they've conditioned their brains to seek understanding through a methodology which is not at all suited for discovering the immaterial. This way of problem solving would naturally taint how a person approaches all unknowables they wish to perceive. What a terrible shame. Friend, if you find yourself in that boat, you'll have to stop thinking God can be revealed through such means. Scientific proof of this sort can't unveil a God who is spirit. Although similar to scientific proof, because it is proof one observes, direct evidence is far more useful to our discussion. This is evidence which is directly observed in a past tense or observable now in the present tense. Although a scientific researcher can't literally see God or measure Him, it's possible they could catalog instances where God has been active in the material realm, such as with various miracles which eyewitnesses testify about. He could then conclude that God must exist. Yet admitting God exists does not translate to knowing God intimately in a life-giving relationship. However, if the researcher was also told who God was by the eyewitnesses, this may be helpful. Nevertheless, it is only really useful if the sources are trustworthy and their knowledge of God is true. Later on in this discussion, we will definitely be looking at the testimonies of reliable eyewitnesses, and they will undoubtedly prove invaluable. Now let's get acquainted with what is known as circumstantial evidence, also known as indirect evidence. Both direct and circumstantial evidence can assist a person with arriving at the knowledge of the truth. Both also have to do with observations. Where direct evidence in a homicide case could be a video surveillance recording of the suspect shooting and killing the victim, circumstantial evidence could be a video surveillance recording of the suspect fleeing the area in which the victim was found dead, a gun registered to the suspect found discarded near the scene of the crime, footprints in mud matching those made by the suspect's shoes, as well as gunpowder residue being found on the suspect's gloves and the sleeves of his jacket. Although not directly observed, Through assessing and analyzing the circumstantial evidence surrounding the case, one can deduce a logical, rational, and likely truth, sometimes to certainty. The more cumulative and corroborative circumstantial evidence you have, the more likely a truth is indeed an absolute truth. If a trustworthy friend was a guest at your home and they looked out the window and informed you that it was raining, you could accept that as the truth. This too would be direct evidence. If your friend entered your home wearing a soaking wet overcoat and carrying an umbrella dripping with water, you could logically conclude that it was raining outside and accept that as the truth. This also is circumstantial evidence. Juries use both types of evidence all of the time in a variety of trials, and seldom are they wrong. Most often they're correct. Also, they frequently rely totally upon circumstantial evidence, yet still draw a reasonable and correct inference of the truth. When it comes to the certainty that a proposed notion is true, there is actually a legal scale for how much proof is necessary for the proposition to be considered true. This scale is called the escalating standard of proof and is essential for our courts of law. The lowest possible standard, which, for example, could be used in a child protection hearing, is some credible evidence. This standard simply establishes that there is enough evidence to begin an inquiry, investigation, or trial. Above that is preponderance of the evidence, and it is used mostly in civil trials. This standard is established if a proposition is more likely to be true than untrue and is rather narrow, i.e. 51% more likely to be true and 49% likely to be untrue. Clear and convincing evidence comes next and is an intermediate standard of proof used in civil proceedings but also in some criminal proceedings. It's met when the proof indicates a proposition is significantly and substantially more likely to be true than untrue. The final standard, which we've all probably heard of while watching court dramas, is when a proposition is shown to be true by the proof beyond a reasonable doubt. This highest level of proof is what is required by law, most often reserved for criminal trials. It is met when there is no plausible reason to believe that a proposition is untrue. In a murder trial, the suspect is most assuredly guilty. Concerning our discussion, it would mean you are left with no reasonable cause for doubting that God exists and that He is who He has said He is. Much of our discussion will also have to do with what are called legal historical proofs. Legal historical proofs pertain to both direct and circumstantial evidence. They primarily rely on three kinds of testimony: oral testimony, written testimony, and exhibits like a knife, clothing, or an ATM transaction record. These types of proofs can also be used to prove something beyond a reasonable doubt. Because unlike what can be verified through the scientific method and its use of repeatable tests, much about God's existence must be verified through inspecting the after effects of His actions in the past, as well as what remains from them in the present. Although this may not be the sort of evidence you were hoping for, I trust you'll find it more than adequate when you begin to sift through it. After all, you likely already apply this sort of reasoning to your everyday life and frequently accept as true many facts that you can't verify through the scientific method. For instance, using the sort of repeatable testing of the scientific method, there's no way you could ever prove you watched TV last night. Regardless of how controlled an environment was, due to the physical restrictions of the space-time continuum, you could never repeat that previous night's event. But you could use legal historical proofs, such as reciting lines of dialogue, recollecting the plot, and even recalling what your neighbors were doing in their backyard had you been able to view them through your window at the time the episode aired. All of this evidence would give us a certain level of confidence based on our scale of escalating standards of proofs. Moreover, just as the scientific method will never be able to prove the existence of monumental figures in a nation's history, it can do nothing to prove the existence of Jesus Christ. If this sort of investigative process using direct and circumstantial and legal historical proofs is enough for modern-day investigators who use old witness reports and aging crime scene photographs to solve cold cases after decades, they will most assuredly be of great benefit in our own investigation as well. One of the resources I've utilized for this discussion is a book I stumbled upon in 2013. It's titled Cold Case Christianity and is written by former police detective J. Warner Wallace. His career is an incredible one, starting as a patrol officer, working gang detail, street narcotics, SWAT, and investigating career criminals. Having conducted thousands of interviews of both eyewitnesses and suspects and being proficient at it, his department sent him onto a number of advanced technical courses to hone and master the science and art of forensic investigation. It was with this unique skill set that he was able to tackle and successfully solve multiple unsolved homicides known as cold cases, which had little to no forensic evidence, relying mostly on old written statements by eyewitnesses and police interviews with suspects. He took his heightened ability for finding the truth from written testimonies and applied it to the New Testament. Based on the application of his skills to what he was reading, he had no choice but to conclude that it was true. From there, he kept on investigating the history of the Christian church and the authenticity of Jesus Christ. Again, looking at all of the circumstantial evidence, he arrived at the truth. What you must understand about Mr. Wallace is this. He began his investigation of Jesus and the New Testament as a 35-year-old angry atheist who prided himself in dissecting the claims of Christians he knew, thinking he was liberating them from a faith that deserved to be doubted. In the end, he was transformed by God and entered into the life-giving relationship with God that I hope you will also receive. He's spent the last 20 years as an apologist, an advocate for Christianity. This is his website, coldcasechristianity.com. Friend, if you've ever heard it said that there's no proof of God's existence, or you can't prove or disprove the existence of God, I'm here to tell you the proof and the evidence are overwhelming and abundant. If you maintain a logical and rational mindset, you too will be able to arrive at the truth of God's existence and that His revelation of Himself through the Holy Bible is unquestionable. It is important, though, that you let the great accumulation of circumstantial evidence speak for itself and leave with you the impression that it rightfully should. If you resist and reject each piece individually because it alone hasn't proven to you that God exists, you will conclude in the end that there still is not enough convincing evidence. If that is your approach and this is the outcome, the problem is not the weight of the evidence. The problem is you and your hardened heart. Another factor in life which is difficult to be grasped and can't really be tested via the scientific method is whether or not someone loves you. It may be so that your brain scans will indicate some sort of chemical activity connected with love if a subject talks with you or about you or interacts with you, but the greater evidence is what they say to you, about you, and do with you and for you. These are the direct and circumstantial proofs we could gather up, weigh, and make a right judgment from. Finally, you will discover in this discussion that using this process, you can investigate what is far less tangible, the reality that God Himself, who you have never known and perhaps even denied or rejected, loves you now and has always loved you unconditionally. Thanks for listening to this video, and I hope that it blesses you. Please do share it with others so they may have the opportunity to understand this incredible truth. Be blessed.